Assalamu alaikum students. How are you all today? Welcome back to another lecture of biology. Today, the lecture number is 35 and the code for this lecture is 9B35.
Previously, we discussed two of the macronutrients, that is, carbohydrates as well as proteins. But today, we will be discussing in detail about the third macronutrient, which is lipids.
Lipids are a group of hydrophobic biomolecules that play important roles in the living organisms. Their primary function is long-term energy storage. But lipids, in addition to all this, is used for protection, insulation, lubrication, and also serves as the precursor for some hormones. It also serves as a key component of cell membranes. We will be discussing all these functions in detail, but in a short while. Let us first talk about the sources of the fats or the lipids. Do you know that fats give more energy than carbohydrates? 1 gram of lipids contain 0.9 kilocalories of energy. This is far greater than that of the carbohydrates as well as proteins. Milk, oil, ghee, butter, cheese, and dry fruits are some sources of fats. Excessive intake of the fatty foods can cause obesity. Now, let us discuss the structure of lipids in detail. Lipids or fats are composed mainly of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, but some lipids contain other elements such as nitrogen and phosphorus. And most lipids do not dissolve in water because they are non-polar. It means that the electrons are shared equally within the molecule, so they have no charged region in the molecule. You may have noticed that lipids in water do not mix. For example, notice the yellow color oil in the beaker of the water shown here. Even if we stir this for several minutes or even several hours, the oil would still separate out in the water. This is because the lipids are hydrophobic. In Latin, the prefix hydro means water and phobic means fear of. So when you hear that lipids are hydrophobic, this basically means that water and lipids do not mix. A fat molecule is composed of a glycerol head and 3 fatty acid tails, each of which is a long hydrocarbon chain, a carbon skeleton bound to the hydrogen atoms. A glycerol molecule has 3 carbon atoms with 2 bonded to 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 bonded to 1 hydrogen atom. They are also bonded to a hydroxyl group, which is an oxygen bonded to a hydrogen, and the fourth bond is made to another carbon atom. When a hydroxyl group from the glycerol molecule binds to a hydrogen from the fatty acid, a water molecule gets released and the two molecules link up. If this happens once, the result is a monoglyceride. If it happens twice, it forms a diglyceride, and 3 times makes a triglyceride. When all the carbons are fully bonded to hydrogen atoms, the fatty acid is said to be saturated. All the bonds between carbon atoms are single, and the hydrocarbon chain has a straight shape. A fat molecule made entirely of the saturated fatty acid is a saturated fat. Due to their straight tails, saturated fats are compact and solid at room temperature. On the other hand, when the hydrocarbon chain has fewer hydrogens, it is said to be unsaturated. Instead of binding to a maximum number of hydrogens, some carbon atoms bind to each other via a double bond. The presence of double bonds may bend the hydrocarbon chain, creating gaps between the molecules, making them less compact. As a result, unsaturated fats are usually liquid at room temperature. A fat molecule that contains only one double bond is a monounsaturated fat, while one that has multiple double bonds is a polyunsaturated fat. For example, butter contains nearly 70% of the saturated and 30% of unsaturated fatty acids, whereas the sunflower oil contains nearly 75% of the unsaturated fatty acids. Now, one important thing that all of you must be knowing is that the saturated fatty acids can increase a person's cholesterol level. Let me explain this by telling you the basics first. Initially, we'll be talking about what is cholesterol and then how the cholesterol and the fats are transported in our blood. Cholesterol is a fat-like substance made by your liver, and it also comes from the food you eat. Your body needs cholesterol in order to make the necessary hormones as well as vitamin D. It is also used for the production of bile, which is a substance that helps in the digestion of fats within our body. Fats cannot be absorbed directly into the bloodstream because you know that if you mix oil and water, the oil will settle out. So, what we need is a transport vehicle, which, as shown in the figure, is a lipoprotein. It's a ring of protein around the outside, and it actually holds the fat and the cholesterol in the middle or in the wall of this lipoprotein. Now, imagine that we have a whole bunch of the saturated fats and we are packing them into this molecule because these are all straight, so you can pack a lot of these saturated fats into the lipoprotein. If the ratio of the fat to the protein is elevated or increased, it is known as a low density lipoprotein. And you may have heard of LDL and HDL. LDL stands for the low density lipoprotein and is usually associated with diets high in saturated fats. As for the cholesterol molecule, it does not change whether it's associated with LDL or HDL. It depends upon the transport vehicle that it's on. If your diet is high in saturated fat, you'll have more LDL, which is referred to as the bad cholesterol. On the other hand, if your diet is a healthier diet and has more unsaturated fats, you can have a bend in those molecules as these are unsaturated, and the triglycerides cannot be packed as tightly as does the saturated fatty acids. Hence, the fat to protein ratio will be less, and this will be referred to as a high density lipoprotein or HDL. Now you know that there are two types of lipoproteins that carry the cholesterol. That is the low density lipoprotein or LDL, also known as the bad cholesterol, and the high density lipoprotein or HDL, also called the good cholesterol. But now you must be wondering, what do I mean by good and bad cholesterol? So let me explain. The low density lipoprotein travels through your bloodstream, delivering the cholesterol to the cells that need it. If your body has too much of this low density lipoprotein or LDL, it can build up in the walls of your arteries. LDL and other substances in your artery wall form a fatty deposit called the plaques. And over the time, these plaques can narrow the artery and reduce its blood flow. LDL carries cholesterol into the plaques, and that is why LDL is called a bad cholesterol. A common place this plaque can build up is in your coronary arteries, which are the blood vessels that feed your heart. This buildup of plaque causes the coronary artery disease. Your liver also makes the high density lipoprotein, also called HDL, or commonly the good cholesterol. HDL helps to remove the excess cholesterol from your cells, your tissues, as well as from the plaques in your blood vessels. This is why HDL is called the good cholesterol. HDL returns the excess cholesterol to your liver, which removes it from the body. Now that we have learned how the fats or the lipids are being transported, let us now look into how the digestion and the absorption of the lipids takes place within the human body. When you eat food like peanut butter, which has about 75% of its calorie from fats, the body goes through a set of steps to digest and absorb the fatty acids. Since the triglycerides are hydrophobic, they form large globules of fat. Enzymes called the lipases present in the saliva, the stomach, and secreted by the pancreas can break down the triglycerides into free fatty acids and monoglycerides. But working on the surface of the globule is inefficient. So to speed up the things, bile is produced by the liver, which breaks up these large fat droplets into smaller droplets and increases the surface area for the lipase to work. Once the triglycerides are broken down into monoglycerides and free fatty acids, these self-assemble into mixed micelles which have a hydrophobic interior
and hydrophilic or water-loving exterior. Micelles move through the watery environment of the intestine and reach the enterocytes or the cells of the intestinal wall. When they get to these cells, the micelles release their fatty acids which diffuse into the enterocytes. Inside the enterocytes, the free fatty acids and monoglycerides reassemble to triglycerides, and these get packed into a larger structure called the chylomicron. The chylomicron is in fact a lipoprotein. It has an outer membrane with phospholipid and proteins and a hydrophobic core that has triglycerides, cholesterol, and fat soluble vitamins. The chylomicron then leaves the enterocytes, but it's too large to get into the endothelial cells of the capillaries. And so instead it enters a nearby lymphatic capillary called the lectio. From here, the chylomicron floats into the lymph, reaching the thoracic duct, which then dumps it into the bloodstream. Once in the blood, the chylomicron releases the fatty acids and the monoglycerides in the peripheral tissues, like the muscles, which use them for energy, as well as the adipose tissue, which can store them. After delivering the triglycerides, the chylomicron shrinks in size and is eventually engulfed by the liver. Now that we have learned about how the fats are being digested, absorbed, and transported within the human body, let us now briefly look into its functions. Lipids make up protective barriers. They comprise the cell membranes of both the eukaryotic as well as the prokaryotic cells. Major types of the biological membrane lipids include the phospholipids, the glycolipids, as well as the cholesterol, as you can see very well in this figure. The membrane lipids are made up of polyunsaturated fatty acids, which gives fluidity and flexibility to the cell membrane. Furthermore, layers of subcutaneous fat under the skin also helps in insulation and protection from the cold. Lipids also form the sheets surrounding the neurons. These sheets are called the myelin sheets that surround the nerve cell axon in order to insulate them and to increase the rate at which the electrical impulses are passed along the axon. In addition to these functions, cholesterol also serves an important role. It serves as a precursor of many steroid hormones, such as estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, corticosteroids, aldosterone, etc. In addition, cholesterol is also a precursor for vitamin D. I hope you have understood all the concepts taught today. Go through this video as many times as you want for your conceptual clarity and reinforce the concepts by doing written practice. Take very good care of yourself. We'll see you soon, inshallah. Allah Hafiz and all the very best.